long before the world was divided by borders, before nations imagined themselves eternal, before history learned how to remember itself, there existed a land where humanity first confronted the full weight of its own potential. It was not a land of gentle beginnings or peaceful certainty. It was a land of tension, fear, ingenuity, and relentless adaptation. A land defined not by what it promised, but by what it demanded. This land would later be called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Those rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, shaped everything. They were neither merciful nor predictable. They flooded without warning, destroying homes, drowning crops, and erasing entire settlements. Other years, they receded too far, leaving the land cracked and useless. Life here was never stable. Survival was never guaranteed. And yet, people stayed. They stayed because the floods, for all their violence, left behind fertile soil unlike any other. Grain grew tall. Fields produced abundance when the waters allowed it. The land offered reward, but only to those willing to understand it, manage it, and endure its cruelty. This was the first great lesson Mesopotamia taught humanity. Nature could not be trusted, but it could be negotiated with through intelligence, cooperation, and memory. The earliest inhabitants settled along the riverbanks in small communities. At first, they lived season to season, storing grain when they could, moving when they had to. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed. They began to plan not just for the next harvest, but for the next year. They dug canals to guide the floods. They raised embankments. They learned to read the land. With planning came permanence. Villages stopped moving. Homes became fixed. Families stayed in one place long enough to leave marks, not just footprints, but foundations. Over time, these villages grew larger, denser, more complex. And complexity required rules. Someone had to decide how water was shared. Someone had to protect stored grain. Someone had to resolve disputes. Power emerged quietly, almost unnoticed. These early leaders were not kings at first. They were organizers, priests, elderspeople who understood the rhythms of the land and the moods of the gods. Because in Mesopotamia, religion was not comfort, it was explanation. The people believed the gods controlled the rivers, the floods, the storms, and the harvests. And the gods, like the rivers, were dangerous. They were powerful, unpredictable, and often indifferent. To survive, humans had to appease them, serve them, obey them. Temples rose at the heart of settlements. These were not merely places of prayer. They were centers of storage, administration, and authority. Grain was collected there. Labor was organized there. Decisions were made there. Cities were born. Among the earliest and most influential of these city builders were the **Sumer**IANS. They did not think of themselves as pioneers of civilization. They were problem solvers. But their solutions changed everything. Cities like Uruk and Ur became vast by ancient standards, housing tens of thousands of people. Streets formed. Districts specialized. Artisans crafted tools, pottery, jewelry. Merchants traveled long distances, exchanging goods with lands far beyond the rivers. Trade networks stretched outward, binding Mesopotamia to the wider world. With trade came numbers. With numbers came accounting. With accounting came writing. At first, writing was nothing more than marks pressed into clay records of grain, livestock, labor owed. But over generations, these symbols evolved into cuneiform, one of humanity's first writing systems. Language became fixed. Memory became permanent. For the first time, humans could speak to the future. Stories were written. Hymns were recorded. Myths took shape not just as spoken tales, but as texts that could survive their tellers. One of these stories would become the Epic of Gilgamesh, a meditation on power, friendship, mortality, and the terror of death. In it, Humanity confronted its own limits for the first time in writing. Writing also changed power. Laws could now be recorded. Orders could be enforced. Authority no longer depended solely on presence. It could travel on clay tablets. Bureaucracy was born. Administration followed. Civilization accelerated. But Mesopotamia was never unified for long. Its cities competed constantly for land, water, and influence. War was not an anomaly. It was a condition of existence. Walls were built. Armies marched. Conquests reshaped borders again and again. Each victory planted the seeds of the next collapse. From this chaos rose the first true empire, the Akkadian Empire. It unified vast territories under a single ruler, imposing language, administration, and military control. For the first time, different peoples were ruled as one. The idea of empire had been invented, but empire demands maintenance. When droughts, rebellions, and invasions weakened Akkadian control, the system fractured, cities fell, populations moved, civilization seemed on the verge of unraveling. It did not, because Mesopotamia had already learned how to rebuild. From the ruins rose Babylon, a city that would define order itself. Under its kings, especially Hammurabi, law was transformed from custom into command. His code was carved into stone, visible to all. Justice was harsh and unequal, but predictable. For the first time, law existed above the ruler. Babylon also became a center of intellectual life. Astronomers charted the stars, believing they revealed the will of the gods. Mathematicians developed systems based on 60 systems that still define how we measure time today. Scholars recorded omens, medical treatments, and observations of the natural world. Daily life continued amid this grandeur. Farmers worked the fields. Women ran households and businesses. Slaves labored under masters. Children learned trades. Priests interpreted signs. The city breathed, suffered, and endured. Later came the Assyrians, masters of war, feared across the ancient world. They ruled through terror, efficiency, and iron. Cities fell before them. Entire populations were relocated. Their empire expanded rapidly and collapsed just as violently. Then the Persians arrived, bringing tolerance, administration, and vast organization. Mesopotamia became part of something even larger. Its political independence faded, but its influence did not, because by then, the foundations of civilization were set. Cities, writing, law, empire, science, history itself. All of it began between those rivers. Mesopotamia was not humanity's first home. It was humanity's first experiment. An experiment in living together, in controlling nature, in recording memory, in wielding power. An experiment filled with failure, cruelty, brilliance, and endurance. And once humanity began that experiment, it could never stop. The rivers still flow. The cities are ruins. But the world they created is still ours.